So, if you don't already know, my name is Maria Levine. I am a women's relationship coach. Technically, I coach anybody in a romantic relationship, but I specifically love to work with women. I feel like those are the people in the relationship generally who look to actively try to improve at all times. I hate to make generalization. I've worked with many great men, but that's just the way I've seen it. So today our topic is going to be about going from conflict to connection and how to use arguments in order to grow your relationships. And I love this topic. I'm very, very passionate about it. I think that we can all truly benefit from learning exactly how to use arguments for our best. For our improvement, because arguments are inevitable. A lot of us really dislike them because they're unpleasant, but I think that if we do them really well, we can get a lot out of them. So that's what we're here about today. So just some general guidelines to make sure that you make the best of the hour that we have together. I want to make sure that you leave this hour being like, that was so worthy of my time. I took a lot out of that. And that's going to ask a little bit of you. So just make sure that you're present, you're not distracted on your phone, half watching something else, driving, anything like that. Just try to be here with me in this moment. I ask that you be open minded. If I give you an idea that you've never heard before, that you think is a little strange, that you're just open to the possibility that it could be something worth trying, worth exploring, worth seeing through. And lastly, I ask that you be action oriented. What I mean by that is in coaching, which is, all of what I do, we're here not just to learn, not just to observe, but to see actual results in our lives. Okay. We want to create the change and we want to be in the driver's seat of that change. And the only way to do that is to be action oriented. So I challenge everybody who comes to my webinars to take one thing away that they want to try and apply, to just commit to being like, okay, I'm going to take that and I'm going to actively make a plan to try it out, to put it into action. That's going to make it so that everything that you learn is something that you also get something out of. Okay. There's a difference between learning in order to like be entertained, and then there's learning that actually improves your life. So I challenge you and I invite you to try that learning on. Lastly, I want you to allow yourself to see what's possible, right? So for a lot of us, we might be in a reality right now where it might be a little limited, right? We might not be able to see past where we currently are. So I just ask that in this hour, you might expand what is possible for you or what you even believe to be possible. So that's my invitation to you. And then lastly, I think I already said lastly, but lastly, be sure to join my email list because I will be giving you the replay of this. I'm going to be giving you a lot of information. So you're going to want to come back to this to make sure that you get it all. In that email, I will be also giving you notes. And weekly, I send out emails with tips, tools, strategies in order to continue to grow your relationship. So the link to that is in the email list. Make sure you do that by the end of the webinar. Um, and you will also get a little special bonus if you decide that you want to work with me if you join today. So just make sure you do that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that more towards the end. But today we're just going to go into all the fun information. So personally, I just want to tell you about where I've come from so you kind of know who you're speaking to or who's speaking to you. So I hope you create deeply connected relationships with your significant other. I have a 3-month program. It's called Reignite Your Relationship, and we build those skills together by mastering everything that we're going to learn today and any other crucial relationship habits that you need to have in order to have that successful relationship. Personally, I watched my friends struggle with their relationships all through my 20s. I struggled with my relationships. My particular struggle was that I avoided conflict. I hated conflict. I hated watching my parents fight, and I never wanted to have that kind of relationship. And so I would avoid them at all costs. And my friends, on the other hand, I would watch them almost always be fighting, always constantly kind of be at odds with their partner and then break up and get back together or jump from relationship to relationship. And so I kind of felt like there was a better way to go about this. And I seeked the solution. I went out and I learned about coaching and life coaching, and I gained all of the skills necessary in order to have those tremendously amazing relationships. And I transformed my romantic relationship by everything that I learned in applying it. And so now I'm in a relationship where my partner and I literally get closer every time we fight. And it's really cool to see. And I want everybody to know that they can have that for themselves as well. It's not something that only a select few are lucky enough to know how to do. We can all achieve this. So I want to make sure that we reframe arguments and conflict and fighting. Okay. I want us to see it in a very different light because I think it's going to benefit us moving forward to know that arguments are actually opportunities. All right. So, as a way of examples and as a way of you for you to see what the future potential can be, I have this concept that I adore. It's called anti-fragility. Right. If you've heard of it before, then you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, I'm gonna explain it. So if you see this little vase here, it's such a pretty little vase, right? And so, or a bowl, I guess. And so anti-fragility is, it comes from this art of repairing shattered ceramics with gold, right? So these ceramics are not the fractures are they don't hide them, they don't try to pretend that it didn't break, they accentuate them with gold. And in that way, the breaking of the bowl made it even a better object. So it is improved by the fact that it has broken. So in that same way, something that is fragile will break, something that is resilient will stay steady, but something that is anti-fragile will literally bend and adapt to its surroundings, and it will actively improve. And so I want to offer that to you for your relationships. I think relationships should be anti-fragile in that they actually gain from chaos. They actually flourish from almost like destruction. These are very strong words, but just stay with me. So it's not just about having a resilient relationship anymore. It's not just about having a relationship that, is stable and, um, almost like, yeah, I guess stable is the word for it. It's now what we really want in order to have longevity is that it improves. It every time that it breaks down, it continuously actively grow. And so we're gonna have problems forever. That's inevitable. What we want, what the ideal is to continuously up level our problems every time. We don't want to have the same fights and issues over and over again. We want to create more overall joy and harmony in our relationship. And the way we do that is by how we handle conflict. Okay. So think of conflict as that breaking point, as that shattering of the glass, as the ball hitting, the object. That is going to be the force that will propel us forward. So conflict, the beautiful thing about conflict is that it allows us to face and address dissatisfaction. It's that breaking point, right? Where we can then build together. I think I said that. How we choose to embrace this opportunity will determine what route our relationship takes. So in my past life, I used to hide my conflicts under the rug, pretend they weren't there, and then they would just build, right? Until eventually there was this giant explosion. So that's one way we could do it, right? But the what I'm offering you, the alternative, is going to be for us to know how to manage that. And I have a process for you where we will be able to get from point A to the point B, which is what I will be teaching you shortly. So before we get into what that process looks like, I want to sell you on the idea that you can influence your relationship based on how you decide to show up. Okay. So when I coach with people, I only work with one person in the relationship. I don't work with couples. The reason that is because I strongly believe that it only takes one person. With one person, I've been that person. I've seen my friends be that person. I've seen my clients be that person. One person is enough to change the course of our relationship for the better. Now, that doesn't mean that we do all of the work, but we are that catalyst. So we don't control other people, right? We can't change our partner. We can't force them to be different than they are. And ultimately, we don't actually want to. Like, even if I could give you, excuse me, the tools to do it, we wouldn't want it because we then would be with an inauthentic person. We wouldn't be with who they actually are. We'd be with a version of them that we puppeteer to be them. Okay. So what we actually want is genuine, authentic connections. We want people to be able to just show up as who they actually are. However, our position in that can be that we influence what the direction our relationship takes. And the way we do this is kind of like a little triangle. So it's what we think about ourselves, how we show up to each interaction, and then what we think about the person. And I'm going to go into these a little bit, but just know that all of these things are things that we have control over. And when we align them properly, and we can start showing up in the way that most benefits our relationship. I love the analogy of a tennis match, right? When you're hitting the ball, you don't control where the person is going to go. You do influence though in what direction. They can go whatever direction they want, but we get to throw it to them in one direction and then they decide whether or not they want to go in that direction, but we have influence over whether or not, what direction that game takes. So relationships, interactions are just like a tennis match. So you get to decide the kind of interactions you're having. Now, because we're talking about conflict and fighting and arguments, I just want to make sure that I hit the point that you want to try to have the kind of arguments that you're comfortable having. What I mean by that is if your partner yells and screams and curses, right, in an argument, and you don't like that, you feel like that's not a kind of argument that you want to have, maybe you feel unsafe or threatened, you want to set a boundary. You want to make sure that you feel safe and that you can actively engage in the argument, if that's the case. Some people don't mind that, right? Some people, I know I have friends who don't care that their partner is yelling and screaming. That's okay with them. So not everybody needs to set this boundary, but if you're kind of having an interaction that you're not comfortable having, that's first and foremost what's most important to address, right? We need to learn how to set a boundary, how to remove ourselves, how to communicate our discomfort, all of that jazz. So that's going to be where we start before we get into any of what I'm going to be talking about today. On the other side of that coin, if you're a person in the relationship that is incredibly reactionary or impulsive in heated arguments, maybe you say things you don't mean, maybe you hit the jugular and there's very, kind of below the belt kind of fighting, and then that creates unwanted consequences for you. What work you're going to have to do first is start by managing those reactions and those impulses so that you're showing up to the argument in the way that you actually want to be showing up and not in this like almost out of control way. So if any of these two things are things that like your arguments have or that you're concerned about, start here. Start by addressing this. And this is stuff that we talk about in our coaching, in my coaching, and we could definitely work through it, point A before we get to what I'm going to teach you. And then like I said earlier, if you were like me and just avoid conflicts at all cost, or, how I used to, then your work would be to understand the importance of embracing conflict and creating the courage to face the fear so that your relationship can benefit from going into the argument and having that argument. So that's where we start before we get into the other stuff, if these are things that are concerning you or your relationship. Okay, so what even is a successful argument? Like let's start at the end. Let's go all the way to the end where like we have had a successful argument. What does that look like? Now, I think many of us have negative associations to conflict. Makes perfect sense. I don't think of any. I wasn't. I don't know if you guys were. You probably weren't, or you probably weren't, or you wouldn't be here. Um, we weren't taught how to have successful arguments, right? We weren't taught that there is a way to have successful arguments. And so we think that it's better to avoid them altogether, that conflict and arguments are just generally bad, right? But in relationships, conflict is crucial, right? It's crucial. It's going to happen. We have to have it in order to figure out how to reach compromises, how to understand our differences, and then how to show up authentically. Because one of my favorite things about arguments actually is this, that it kind of allows you to cut through niceties and just say things in a really raw and honest way. Like if you've ever been in the middle of a heated argument, you're probably not worried about how this person is going to perceive what you were about to say. You're not too self-conscious about it because there's a lot of emotion that's coming out and it's just allowing you to kind of say things. Now, this also kind of gets to a point where we might end up saying things that we regret or saying things in a negative way, but I'm going to help you navigate how to do it in a way that is generally authentic and honest without being, malicious. But I think the space of an argument really calls for us to be fully authentic. And I think that really benefits our relationships. So ultimately, a successful argument, in my definition, is one where both parties leave feeling understood, resolved, or more clear about the situation. Now, I don't think every successful argument has to end in a resolution. Sometimes a successful argument is just feeling like, oh, I get this person more, or I understand the situation better. And that can actually lead to a lot of closeness in and of itself, even if you're both kind of like, well, I still don't know what we're going to do about the problem, but I feel better because we're on the same page and we can tackle it from here on out from a more neutral or even joyful space. So that's how I'm defining successful arguments. All right, so now let's get to the big question. How do we do this? So these 3 steps are going to be jam-packed with information. So I tried to really simplify it to like the most important stuff. And the way that I want you to remember it, just so you have it in your pocket for when you need it, is just 3 little steps. So what are the facts? What am I feeling? And what are the findings? So facts, feelings, and findings. Um, your first question is going to be, what are we fighting about? Second question is, how do I feel? And the third question is, when can I learn? Now I'm going to dive deep into each of these, but just in case you're in the middle of a fight, you're like, oh, what am I supposed to do? Facts, feelings, and findings. So it can bring you back to this practice. Now, remember, this is a skill and it's going to take practice. So you're not going to necessarily get it right off the bat. It will require repetition, just like learning a language, an instrument, a sport. Over time, you will get better at it. It will get easier. But if it's something that you've never tried before, or you've never done in this way, it might take some time to really get the hang of it. So I encourage you to try it and I encourage you to stick with it, because ultimately it will greatly benefit the connection that you have with your partners and anyone else that you choose to use this process with. Okay, so step 1, what are the facts? Let's get the information. You want to make sure that you know what you're fighting about, even though you might think you know. So this is really funny because some of us are like, we go into fights or we go into disagreements, conflict. I'm using all of those interchangeably. Um, no, thinking that we know exactly what we're fighting about, or knowing, everything that we need to know. But ultimately we don't, or because we're blinded by emotion, we don't care enough to find out. So our first goal has to become to understand the situation fully. Now, that this is a shift for so many of us, because normally what we want and what our, ego wants, it's to be understood. We want people to know what our point right away. And that is most important when we're, approaching an argument. So the shift, the dynamic that needs to change is now what is going on here has to be the first priority. What are all of the facts of the situation? Now, communication can be rifled with misunderstanding, and I'm going to tell you why. So, there are 4 things that are happening in a communication cycle, all right? There is whatever it is that they say, what they mean by what they say. Okay. There's what you hear, like what actually enters your understanding. And then there's your interpretation of what they said, or actually your interpretation of what you heard them say and what you make that mean. All right. So in this process, there's so much room for us to misinterpret, misunderstand, mishear, all of that stuff. And so it's super crucial for us, especially if we're having issues that are, we keep having the same fight over and over, or it's just not getting resolved, that we slow this process down so we can really get to the root of what is happening here. So the first skill that I want to teach you, and a little practice that you can take on, is to summarize their story. So this is something that you're going to learn if you ever go to a couples therapy session, or maybe even a regular therapist session. It's incredibly useful for communication. So what you want to say is, you want to tell them what you heard them say and not move on until they agree with you. All right. So something like, this is what I'm hearing. Is this what you mean? Right. So we're going to pause before because what's going to happen normally in a normal cycle is you're going to hear something, you're going to make an interpretation, you're going to react to your interpretation. All right. What this is doing differently is you're going to hear something, and instead of going into reaction, you're going to pause and you're going to repeat. You're going to confirm the information that you have and the way that you have it. So this is what I'm understanding. All right. Are we on the same page? Is this what you mean? Right. Sometimes my partner and I will go, we're going in circles. Can you repeat what you hear me say so I make sure that you understand me fully? And then he'll say it back to me and he'll be like, yes, but this, or exactly, that's right, I understand. And just that feeling of being understood by your person really helps drop our defenses. It's a really nice kind of like relaxing into. It doesn't fix everything right away, but we can definitely kind of like, if our swords are both out, we can kind of like put them down for a minute, because it's like, all right, we're at least working as a team to try to figure this out together. So that's where we start. Now, on the opposite of that, when it's your turn to talk or when you're talking, you want to do the same or ask them to do the same for you. So, hey, this is what I'm saying, right? Maybe you already said it, but can you repeat it for me so that I know that you understand? Can you say it back to me so I know that we're not, miscommunicating here? Now, the problem with this is that it takes a rational mind to do this. It takes a logical kind of coming from a logical kind of a calm place to be able to get here. And when we're in the middle of an argument, we're very heated, we're very angry, we're very reactionary. So we're going to address feelings in part 2. But I just want you to know that having facts, having all the information, understanding each other is very, very important, so that both of you can feel heard and you can feel understood. And that when we both feel heard and understood, we can basically walk together instead of instead of coming at each other from opposite ends. We have to know, as far as our role goes, we have to know that interpretation is not fact. It's not a fact. When someone does or says something, we are often reacting to what we think they said or what we made it mean, not actually what is happening. All right. We're almost like we're fighting with, not with reality, but with our own story of reality. And other people are going to do the same to you, just FYI. Other people are going to take what you say, they're going to make it mean something, and they're going to react to what they're thinking about it. And that's okay. We're human beings. Interpretation is what we do. I want you to be aware of it so that you can be better at looking at that interpretation, deciding on purpose whether or not that's the best interpretation, or, just being in awareness that it's not the only interpretation, and then deciding what interpretation will actually benefit us, or maybe this is the perfect interpretation, right? So I'm just going to give you an example so it's a little bit more grounded. When my partner and I were first dating, he would do this thing where we would be on a date and I felt like things were going great. And then he just kind of like get really quiet and kind of like shut down. And I felt like he was disappearing. Like he was right in front of me, but all of a sudden he wasn't really there. And it was really off-putting because I was just getting to know him and I didn't know what was going on. So my brain, because of my history and my trauma and blah, 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 decided to make it mean that he didn't like me, that he wasn't interested in me, right? And that's super rational. Like anybody, I would argue that anybody from the outside looking in would be like, oh, this guy is just not into you. And so I took that and I ran with it. And I said, okay, well, he probably doesn't like me. Let me go and tell him that we should spend less time together, or that we should, maybe see other people or whatever. So I went with him with this interpretation of what was happening. And he goes, whoa, 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 wait a minute. No, this is what's happening. And so he started to tell me about himself and about um what he has going on. And I won't tell you all of the dirty details, but basically it wasn't about me. It was 100% about him and something that he wanted and needed to work on. And so we came up with a solution of like how we can, help him notice that he's doing it and kind of help him pull him out of it, or whatever needed to happen, right? So if I hadn't, luckily we were in a situation where we addressed it, we were able to address it. But if I hadn't gone to him and given him the option to address it with me, if I had just been like, ghosted him or left him or whatever, it would have just been my reality that I was working with. right? So we want to make sure that we're bringing our interpretation to the table in order for it to be dissected. And we need to be in awareness that everything that we think is only one option out of the many things that we could think, right? We develop this awareness of our own thinking. And the best way to do this is to go, what else might be true, right? This is one way to look at the situation. What else could be true? And that allows our brain to kind of expand our perspective greater. Okay. Another example, it's like if your partner shows up and they're upset about something because you didn't clean, you didn't do the dishes, you didn't take out the trash. And our interpretation of that is to think my partner, they think I'm lazy and they're so unappreciative of me and they don't see all the other things I do, right? And then we go and we have a fight about that. We're not addressing here what actually happened, which is your partner brought up an issue that they're concerned with. You know, what else might be true about what they're thinking? What else might be true about why they brought this up? It helps neutralize the situation and bring curiosity into the picture. It just redirects us. Now, other people will have thoughts and feelings about you, like I mentioned earlier, that we don't have control over. They're going to have interpretation of what you do and what you say. Now, our role in that, if we're with someone, you know, in a dynamic that we're close to, is to really get clear and slow the process and do what I was talking about earlier. But the other strategy is to let people think what they want to think and to get to a place where we accept that, right? Because what we might try to do is control other people, um, control what they think about us by maybe changing ourselves, right? Maybe getting into some people pleasing territory. Maybe we get defensive or manipulative. When we try to change what other people think about us, we start to get into this icky place of not being authentic. So we have to kind of get into this feeling of resolution within ourselves that other people are going to think what they want. We can try to clarify, we can try to, you know, get them to see it our way. But ultimately, we're going to have to deal with the reality that they get to interpret things and feel the way they feel. Now, what I recommend then is instead of putting our focus on how other people are thinking and, you know, trying to get them to think differently, our focus should be on how do we want to show up? And are we doing that? Are we in alignment with what really is important to us and the way that we want to be in the world? So for sake of example, let's say your parents, they think that you are nosy. I don't know. It's just random, right? They think you're too inquisitive and you're too much. Okay. So they have this thought about you. Now I could change myself and try to ask less questions. And maybe for the sake of courtesy, I might, right? But if I really like how I'm showing up, if this is an attribute of myself that I'm happy with, then I have to just get to a point where they're going to think that and I'm going to be who I am and that's going to be okay. Right. So this is something that we can work on, but I just want to introduce this into the topic because I think when we start to try to change other people, we get into some weird territory. And this is ultimately why what we think about ourselves in that little triangle that I taught earlier, what we think about ourselves really matters because if we don't like ourselves, if we have a lot of negative emotions towards ourselves, we're not going to want to have our backs and show up in a grand, authentic way because we are too stuck in this place of negativity within ourselves. All right, now we're on to feelings. Now this could be one or two, if I'm honest with you. It really depends on your approach. I put it as two because I think that we can do it as we're having the argument. We don't necessarily need to do it, you know, like first. So I'll tell you what I mean. So sometimes the most difficult part of an argument is how we're feeling, right? When we are intensely emotional, this has been proven. We've studied this. When we're too angry or emotional, we drop our IQ. Like we're literally less smart. We don't have access to this rational, forth thinking part of our mind, the prefrontal cortex. And so we say things and do things that are just not our best. So we have to learn how to regulate our nervous system, how to self-soothe so that we can get access to a rational mind and speak and act from an intentional place. And this is the art of reacting versus responding. So you're no longer coming from this place of reaction and not thinking. You're now pausing and you're able to come at it from a more thoughtful place. So this is, again, another skill that will take practice. But what I encourage you to do or try is I think of it almost like a short little meditation, where you breathe into the emotion. So whatever your body is feeling, you want to find it in your physical body. So every emotion will have a physical reaction to it. So when you're angry, or I'll give you my example. When I'm angry, um, I'm not angry too often, but I usually feel it like in my jaw. I get very tense. There's maybe like a heaviness in my chest. And so I can actually feel that, and I can kind of find it in my mind's eye, and I can give it like a almost like a color and like a texture. And so I sit with those feelings, with those physical feelings, and I describe those feelings to myself. So I go, there's a heavy knot in my chest, there's tightness in my throat, there's sweat on my palms, right? And I breathe and I just kind of let that exist within my body. And I just see it as a vibration. I just notice the vibration. Now, this is something you can do in the moment. You can take time and ask to kind of remove yourself from the argument in order to do this and come back to the argument once you feel calmer. But what's important is that you open up to the emotion, because the alternative, and what many of us do, is we tense up and we kind of shut down from the emotion because emotions are unpleasant, negative ones. So we try to avoid them. So this is asking you to kind of open up to the experience of whatever emotion you're having. And when we do that, we actually calm down, because when we're resisting the emotion, pushing it away, distracting ourselves from it, and we inadvertently make it louder, because emotions want to be felt. This is this is called flooding in some relationship books. And I like the term flooding because you can really feel that, like, I am being flooded, right? Drowning in my own emotion. So you want to avoid being flooded by learning how to self-soothe, how to feel the feelings, how to process them, so that you can come back, from a calmer place. So it doesn't mean you're going to get from like angry to happy, but you can get from angry to neutral, or you can get from angry to, just a lower level of whatever that is for you. And then if you're in the middle of an argument, arguments are gonna generally, the typical way they go is like escalating, right? So you're here, and then someone says something here, and then someone says something here, and then you're just continuously escalating until, it's like, we can't do this anymore, or whatever. So what repair attempts are, it's a way from, instead of going from here to here, maybe we go here, or maybe, we stay here, or whatever. So these are little tricks that you can do or bring into the conversation when you're having an argument. So I have this whole little thing, and I'm gonna email this to you if you sign up, you'll have access to this. Um, but they just look like, making a joke, or calling out what the argument is about, or, offering a compromise, just saying, I'm feeling agitated, little things like that, that actually reminds us in the moment that, like, oh, we're on the same team, we're working towards something good. Let's try to not get out of hands, out of control. Um, they're very, very useful, and they help bring you back to this place of trust and togetherness. Okay, and then lastly, we have solutions, findings, analysis. This is the part, I mean, they're all crucial, but this part is going to make the difference between having just like a typical argument and having like an anti-fragile kind of dynamic here. So you want to make sure that you are actively improving after your arguments, that you are fully understanding the whole reason for having them, and you can actually do them differently next time. So I have a list of questions. Again, I will email them to you if you join my list, that you can ask after an argument. So what did I learn about my partner because of this? What solutions does this conflict require, right? If maybe you didn't get to the point where you're talking about solutions, or maybe you did and you want to make sure that you know, have them somewhere. I encourage you to write this down. You don't have to, you can talk it out, but this is an exercise that you do with yourself. So when I say talk it out, I guess I mean like say them out loud. I don't know. It depends, whatever works for you. How can we avoid this fight going forward or this issue going forward, if at all possible? How do I need to show up to my relationship differently, right? Maybe this argument taught me that I need to be more compassionate, or maybe it taught me that I need to be more forthcoming, right? What is it that I can now take from this to actively apply to my relationship on the day to day? Do I need to apologize, ask for an apology, or forgive? How do I feel now? Are there any unfinished pieces left to resolve? Does my partner feel resolved, right? You want to check in on them and make sure that they don't feel like, well, this wasn't really dealt with properly, or I still feel like this wasn't addressed. So this is an opportunity to go back, not have the same argument again, but maybe have a different version of the argument where you can come at it a little cleaner, a little more um, calm. And if it doesn't need to happen, then great, it doesn't need to happen, but you at least you checked in and you made sure that all of the box, you know, the whole whatever, how do I say this? Like if the argument is needs to be put in a box to seal it, that you both agree that it's like it's good to be sealed, that it's not being left a little bit ajar. Because what happens over time is if you have a lot of little arguments that aren't fully resolved and they're kind of still open, your brain will keep them in your mind and you'll still kind of go back to them even though you're not conscious of it. You hold on to these things. And so it'll stay open, and then you'll like find yourself bringing it up 6 months later because it wasn't actually resolved and you still hold a lot of emotions about it or towards it. And then apart from that, this is a little definitely optional. I mean, it's all optional, but I really like this as I also encourage my clients to talk about the argument itself, not what you were actually fighting about, but like the way that you fought, if that makes sense. So I just wanted to check in about what we talked about the other day, make sure that you feel resolved and see if you had anything else to say, right? That's part of kind of the analysis that I talked about. You also want to own up to your part of it. So I love this. This is so the word I can think of is like so sexy to have somebody who will take accountability for their half of something. So if you go to your partner and say, I just want you to know that what I'm gonna do differently moving forward is, and then you tell them, right? I'm not gonna do this, or I'm gonna try to do that, or whatever, they're gonna feel so seen. They're gonna be like, yes, they got it. They're there with me. And ideally, I can't promise this, but what happens is they start to do the same to you. They start to offer you how they're going to show up differently, and so that your dynamic can actively improve and change. Now, I don't want you to go to them and say, well, what are you going to do differently, right? Because that's putting too much expectation. You just want to set the example. And if you're with someone who is there with you, who wants to grow and who wants to learn, they will follow you. Like I said, you want to avoid having the same argument unless you think that you have to or it wasn't fully dealt with. And then talk about the argument as like, and I think I just said this earlier, but like, how did we fight? Like, hey, I didn't like that. You know, maybe we raised our voice a little bit too much. Maybe let's try to avoid that. Or did you notice that you said this and this really hurts me? So could you avoid saying that? Like that kind of stuff. It's not about whatever the topic is, it's just about the way that you had the fight. And in this post argument, you know, analysis, ideally you're coming at it from a neutral kind of space. Your defenses are down and you're taking responsibility for your half of whatever occurred. There will always be half to take responsibility for, even if maybe it's not half, maybe it's 30%, but whatever it is, you want to take accountability for that. And then, oh, we're almost at the end. So I want you to think of conflict as a superpower. It's a skill you can grow and learn and develop. You can have anti-fragile relationships when you master how to argue efficiently. It can turn arguments into something that can even be fun. Um, like I said, it'll take practice, but you can and will do it with devotion and time. I talked a little bit about my program earlier, but it's called Reignite Your Relationship. And in it, I walk you through this process. So you meet with me every week and I hold your hand and I tell you, I show you what you could do better, what obstacles, how to overcome the obstacles that come up. Um, that way you can develop this skill a lot faster than you would on your own, and you will master it. You will be sure to master this as a skill, right? Instead of kind of like coming in and out of it as a novice, you will be like, you will master it. That's something I can guarantee you. It's one of my favorite skills to teach. You will feel confident that you know how to show up for your relationship under any circumstances. Um, and if you haven't already, please join my email list so that you can get the replay of this, all of the notes with all of the questions and all of the little, what do I call them? The little practices that I encourage you to take on. And then in addition, every week you will get tips, tools, strategies to transform your relationship to the next level. Now, I want to make sure I address this because I have people sometimes ask me, well, what about my partner? Like, what if they don't want to do this? Or what if they're not like on board with all of the stuff that you're talking about? First of all, they don't have to. What we're doing is we're just learning how to set up our relationship for success, and we're just offering our partner an invitation. We're like, hey, this is what I've got going on. Would you like to come along? Is basically the way that we're posing it. We're not actually saying that to them, but that's just the method. So we don't control what they do and whether or not they want to. And we don't have to make it mean anything negative about our relationship, that it's not working, that they're not worth having, that blah, blah, blah. Like it doesn't have to mean any of that. We start this journey with the best assumptions about our person, that we made a good choice and that you're gonna rise to the occasion. And then we collect data along the way about what they've decided to do and what we want to do about that. So once you show up the way that you want to, we just notice what our partner does in reaction. Now, unfortunately, not everybody is going to want to step up and do the process in the way that, that we would like them to. And with that information, we get to decide what do we do with that and how do we manage that. So that's part of what I can offer you in terms of your partner's half. Um, More details about my specific coaching program. We meet every week for 3 months. I also have a 6 month program that if you want to take this to like a deeper level, we master the skills in order to overcome your specific obstacle, right? If this isn't your specific problem, whatever it is, we learn the skills necessary to overcome it. I'm there to be your guide, your teacher, your mentor, so you don't have to feel alone, confused, or stuck. And then by the end of our time together, you will have that deeply connected relationship with your partner and also with yourself, which is my favorite part. So yeah, that's what I have for you. Oh, great timing. We have 15 minutes left. So this is a time for you to ask me any questions to, make sure I clarify anything that wasn't clear. Or if you would like a little bit of coaching into your specific situation, we can also talk a little bit about that. So I'm going to go ahead and hit pause on the